going to be doing, so we have just completed today 2.1 and 3.1 notes. Now I've kind of seen from Canva's perspective that there's been a little bit of a few problems with, the last video, the light fell and the camera fell and everything fell. And then, I had to consistently apologize. And I also noticed on the video that you're kind of a little bit of a distance away. You can faintly see everything. And if I bring it a little bit closer, I can show you even better. So we're gonna kind of zoom in and out every now and then. So I will be putting my hands up to the camera. So again, I'm gonna restate what I said before. So I will be working on doing all of these. So we got 1.1, 2.2. Today we're gonna be doing 2.4, 3.2, 3.3. Now 3.4 and 3.5 are actually together, but they're so like I don't like them being together. They're very related, and I understand, but at the same time, it's very, very hard to kind of organize them. And so it just kind of creates, or, well, it's not, but it's kind of hard to do one video on just all of it. So we're gonna kind of skip it. So, Tuesday we did the 1.2 notes. Tomorrow we're going to be doing 1.1, 3.2, and 4.1 and 4.2. And then on Friday, hopefully, we will be doing our first session of this exam review on this side over here. Let me take a look at this. Now you can see, but I wish it could be a little bit better, but it doesn't matter. We're good. So you have 3.4, 3.5. I think those are going to be on Saturday. So tomorrow we're doing 1.1, 3.2, 4.1, and 4.2. On Friday, we're not going to do 3. We're going to do 4.3, 3.3, and 2.2. So we're just going to get those out of the way. These are long, they're arduous, to me, they're a little bit boring. This one, we might have to split up into 2, because, it's a lot to handle. But, it's kind of simple. So it's not bad at all. So, and then we're going to be doing one session. So, it's about almost 4 hours of videos tomorrow. At least, that's the maximum. We're probably only going to have, especially with, well, not tomorrow, but Friday, there's going to be about 4. 2.2 is a little bit long. 3.3 is pretty big, beefy. 3.2 is going to be about an hour, hour and a half. So that's just that. And then you've got these exam sessions. In the next couple of days, we're going to be having a good 3 to 4 hours of video come out because we've got so much going on. So, let's go to 2.4. 2.4 is very quick, so we can actually get it done quite quickly. We're going to start right here. So this is graphical misrepresentation in data. So let's take this and let's zoom in a little bit. There we go. Oops. So push this up. There you go. Okay. So the guidelines for constructing good graphs, because sometimes you've got bad graphs out there. You've got your third graders who are doing a graph and it looks like a disoriented mess. So these are general guidelines to do it. So you need to title and label everything. And I don't want to stress this, but I kind of feel like I'm teaching the choir. So you need to title and graph all of your axes, and also you're going to need to title and graph the actual graph itself, and you're always going to need to title and graph the axes, y and x, especially with bar graphs, line graphs, whatever. Avoid distortion. If it looks distorted, it doesn't look good. Minimize the amount of white space. This is true. You don't want to have a lot of white space because then you might lead to distortion. So use the available space to let the data stand out. If you truncate, the scales clearly indicate. So truncating is when you take and you jump on one of the axes. So let me show you down here. So there isn't a truncation, but let's say we were going from 0 to, 4,000. I would truncate that by putting this little line in here. That's what that means. And it would go from 0 to 4,000. And that shows you that, there's a large, um, there's a stretch right here by like a couple thousand. And that's just to make the charts way more concise. Because if you had an actual full out chart where you had all those numbers, it would just make it a mess. Okay, so you're going to want to avoid clutter. So you're going to want to minimize the white space, but you don't want to put in a lot of stuff. You don't want a lot of grid lines, so you don't want it to be like, you don't want to have a bar graph on graphing paper. That might be harder to look at because there's so much there. That's kind of cluttery. And unnecessary background or pictures, don't just throw in clip art. That's like, you don't want to distract the reader, but it's so unnecessary to like throw. And we're going to go through some of them, so do not worry. We're going to have a lovely time with all of these. So avoid clutter, avoid 3 dimensions. They look nice, but they really distract it because they can distort the information. So it's kind of falling back into that. Yes, do not use more than one design in the same graph. Sometimes graphs use a different design in one portion of the graph to draw attention to the area. Don't try to force the reader to any specific part of the graph. So you don't want to make, your pie graph. You don't want to make one, a neon yellow and the other one is such a mundane, like, brown. You don't want to do that. And avoid relative graphs that are devoid of data or scales. And we'll see more about this, but this is also important. You don't want to have a relative graph that is just lacks data or scales. You always, especially for like relative frequency, we need to know its relative frequency. So here we have our first graph, and you can see it. It's this frequency histogram. So you can kind of see what's wrong. First you have, none of the axes are labeled. There's not a good title, like frequency histogram, question mark. And, the horizontal axis should be labeled. The axes are not labeled with values. And it's very cluttered. So this is very cluttered. What you would want to do is you want to find the class and midpoint of each one of these, which we will get into in like 3.2, I believe. 3.2, 3.3? I think 3.3. But that's what that is. So, you don't want to do like a range of data because that is a bit confusing. When I'm looking at this, I'm like, what do they mean? Like, this is quite hard to read and it's not very appealing. So, it's best to display the information someplace else. So, here's our next one right here. Just catch back a minute. So, again, you've got none of the axes labeled. You've got the title is not even, these frequency histogram question mark. And my instructor told me she actually receives these graphs in some of her classes, and it's kind of disheartening. So the one thing on what I can say is these need to be vertical. This isn't always the best way to do this because it's kind of hard to read if you want it to be appealing. But then again, you have to fit it in there. So, it's okay. But you have a ton of bars. So that's a big problem. You know, it's actually best to do a for this one because you've got like exponential growth going on here. This is going way up there. It's kind of best to do a line graph with this because there's so many. Plus, like on this side, the scale of this, you know, most of these like 1 to like about like 15 don't even reach that. And if you only want to look at one part, you could truncate, but like that's big numbers. And they're not labeled. So I don't know what this graph is at all. Frequency histogram of income per person. So this would be better to be per capita. Just to kind of stay consistent, but that doesn't matter. So this needs to be titled. All it says is access title. That's not very good. This could be a um, better title. The bars, the bars here, you've got all this that has nothing to do with any of this. Um, and income per person. Like, what is that income in? Is that income in thousands, millions, billions? You know? And then on the access title, you got, like, what is this? So, income per person. But this is actually quite. So, if this was income per person, that should actually go up here. Now that I'm thinking about it. Because this should be the income per person, and this should be the per person. And yes, you do need units, because what is this? Millions, billions, trillions? I don't know. There's gonna be some fun ones coming up. Okay, here's this one right here. This, hallelujah. So, this graph is a 3D graph. It is one of the worst graphs I have personally seen myself. I never want to touch this graph ever again. So, on our right, it's actually almost better to do a line graph with this, but again, you've got, what is this? You need to do class points. So much better. Because it also shouldn't be 3D. 3D seems appealing, but when I'm looking at it, right here, this could be 0. Or it could be, 0.01. I don't know. Or this could be, like, you know what I mean? So it's very hard to gauge. Also, what is this doing right here? This distracts me. This should be up here. I spelled that wrong. Oopsie. Then, like, the accesses aren't titled either. This is relative frequency, but what is the? Well, yeah, it is relative frequency, so it won't need to be written labeled. But what is this? Is this like the trillions I make a month? I don't know. Okay, this one like grinds my gears. Frequency polygraph? Question mark or polygon? I apologize. Um, yeah, this midpoints again. The one thing you need to do about this is have midpoints. I'm gonna put this over here. Midpoints right here. You kind of already seen what I have in notes, but I'm just gonna reiterate them. Both of the axes should be titled. What is this? Frequency, relative frequency, cumulative frequency. What is it? I mean, it is a line graph, so it's much better than these other graphs because it actually shows it. And for this graph should actually only be a line graph because it's showing actual um, exponential growth. And when you have a bar graph, you shouldn't be showing that type of growth. So it's better to be a line. So these need to be labeled. She's saying start and end with fake classes. And what that means to start and end with fake classes is to kind of like start it with one class and end it with a fake. That's about it. Okay, I think the next one. Oh, these are gorgeous. These are just wonderfully gorgeous. Okay, this thing is. I don't even know. So in this one, you actually have the graphs done. So you have the relative frequency all done and the income per person, and that's great. So the relative frequency frequency polygon for income per person. So you need to get rid of the dollar signs. What is this? Okay, if this is a stats class, you shouldn't never ever put that in there. Picture is very cluttered. It is. Specifically, these both need to have units, and there's not really any midpoints in it. But I'm not worried about midpoints. But you don't really need to have all these down here because they're just going to be the same thing. So it's a bit better than the other ones we've seen, but it's still not the best. Okay, so right here, I think this is the last one. Yep, it is. Okay. So this is our last chart, and then we get the notes. So this is a pie chart, brutal pie chart. First, there's no labels, none, anywhere. You can't actually fit that many labels in here. You have 12 slices, but at the same time you have more than 12. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, about 19, maybe 20. Way too many sectors on this pie. You should be doing either a line graph because there's so much data, or you should be doing a bar graph, but even that is a little bit much. So a line graph would be best for all of this data. It needs to be better than just a pie chart. I mean, that doesn't really help me with anything. So, I mean, that's pretty much it for these. So, we just showed you why these were wrong. And then you got these little notes up here. Okay, so let me help you out. So what it says is I do apologize. Okay, there we go. So good graphs avoid the following. They do not have graphs that have an unlabeled axis truncated. This is such an important part about looking at it. So if the axis is not properly truncated, it misinforms the information. And I've had this happen many times. Discontinuity in vertical or horizontal axis. And this discontinuity is kind of a problem. And then choosing an inappropriate vertical or horizontal axis scale. So what's inappropriate about this is that, you've got house per income, and then you've just got this line in the middle. Like, what is this? There's a lot of discontinuity in here. It's not very continuous. Reports per year. You gotta put more in here, or it's kind of hard to look at. So then it also says, also be careful with double X or double Y axes. And this is a little bit more complicated. So let's look. So in this one, you have Planned Parenthood Federation of America, abortions up, life-saving procedures down. And this is an actual graph that is used, and you can kind of see it's a bit of a propaganda use. And I'm not saying that it's propaganda to use it, but it's really bad. So let's look. First, there is no y-axis, okay? There is none. There's not a vertical axis right here. So, I could draw this line going, a linear regression for all that matters. Or, I could, it could be not a linear regression, but exponential growth. I could do that because, it wouldn't be probably possible, but, you've got 2006, 2013. This goes up. Oh. Okay, sorry about that. Again, I need to work on this a little bit. So, let's try this. There we go. It's kind of doing a balancing act of his own. So, this is there's no vertical axis, so I could do whatever I want. And what this says is abortions up, life-saving procedures down. But what the actual graph is showing is that abortions are not up. Abortions are actually constant, and the cancer services are going down over time. More than likely, probably because less people might be getting cancer. But this could also be explained from looking variables, not from just Planned Parenthood. So this is more of a propaganda poster. This is an actual representation. Better use of double y-axis. And you can get more into this later, but that's about it. So that'll be it for this video. It's about 20 minutes long. Tomorrow, I think I'll post up tonight what will be on tomorrow. My back's hurting. The camera's driving me nuts. I've already done about an hour and a half. So I hope this this was helpful for many of you, maybe, as a refresher. I know it's not quality. I really try my best for this quality. I'm quite disadvantaged, not in, like, financial sources, but, in actual other difficulties. But, it's fine. So, I hope this helped. It's helping me a lot. I'm going through a lot more. But it's exhausting. So I'll see you guys all tomorrow at 1 o'clock for our first video. It's going to be 3.2. Then followed after that, it'll be 4.1.